And we are off. It's the final week of October, the final week of my 40s. I turned 50 on Friday. It's going to be a quiet affair. In the run up to it, I've been taking real good care of myself and also rereading the book When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron. I highly recommend it for anyone, anytime, whether things are feeling like they are together or they're falling apart, as well as her book Taking the Leap. I'm reading those two books in the run-up to my 50th to be as emotionally and mentally prepared as I can be to start off this next decade of life, and I'm very interested in all of your ideas and advice. What did you do when you turned 50? How did things go after 50? Especially from you dudes out there, just let me know how the old, the plumbing is working and everything else. It's great to be here with you. Thank you for pressing play on today's episode of Stand Up. I've got an excellent guest joining me for the first time. First-timer here. She's a scholar and an author, real good at explaining tax policy. We talk about this, one of the most boring often, but most important issues. She makes it understandable, relatable, and interesting. Very happy to welcome Professor Ray Madoff joining me to talk about her new book, The Second Estate, How the Tax Code Made an American Aristocracy. And no, she's not related to Bernie. She makes that very clear in her opening. And if you want to skip ahead to the interview, it begins at it's in. But I hope you'll stay here because I've got your headlines and a clip show, so let's do it.
It's Pete's Headlines and Clip Show. Get in on the shit.
That's right, a shit show it was, and continues to be in the United States of America with our tiny mad king of a dictator destroying everything all the time as much as he can. Everybody was talking about Blob the Builder's new vanity project where he destroyed the beloved West Wing and is building a ballroom for oligarchs. We learned over the weekend that a reclusive billionaire and major financial backer of Teddy Roosevelt is the guy who is going to be donating $130 million to the U.S. government to help pay troops during the shutdown. Of course, Darth Tax Evader announced the donation the end of last week, but he declined to name the person who provided the funds, only calling him a, quote, patriot and a friend. Well, the administration or regime's 2025 budget requested about $600 billion in total military compensation, so only a $130 million donation would equal about $100 a service member. Well, we found out who the guy is. It's Timothy Mellon. He's a wealthy banking heir and railroad magnate, a longtime backer of Trump who gave tens of millions of dollars to groups supporting his campaign. Last year, he made a $50 donation to a super PAC supporting the president, which is one of the largest single contributions ever disclosed. Wow, $50 million. He's the grandson, of course, of Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon, who was not a prominent Republican donor until our commander and thief was actually elected. And so he's poured hundreds of millions of dollars in recent years into supporting him and the Republican Party. He's also a significant supporter of RFK Jr. Oh, great. Yeah. Donated millions to Kennedy's presidential campaign, also given money to his anti-vaccine group, Children's Health Defense. And finally, the dude is apparently obsessed with Amelia Earhart, which explains why old Donnie D. Cups has shown some fake interest in her lately. So that's a little bit of background on another major donor, another guy who inherited money. Talk about guys like him with my guest today. So that's a big story. Our Ayatollah, as I'm calling him, has arrived in Asia, specifically Malaysia, yesterday for a summit of the Association of Southeast Asian Countries, his first stop in a 5-day Asia tour that's expected to culminate in a face-to-face or probably a face plant with the leader of China, Xi, in South Korea. He said it's the first issue he plans to raise with Xi at their meeting is fentanyl. The U.S. accuses China of failing to curb the international flow of precursor chemicals for the deadly opioid, which Trump has cited as one of his justifications for imposing tariffs. And breaking late Sunday, here's the headline: U.S. and China agree to a framework for trade deal ahead of Xi-Trump meeting. U.S. Treasury Secretary is anticipating the tariff truce with China will be extended and that China will revive substantial purchases of soybeans. China's top trade negotiator said both sides had reached a preliminary consensus and will next go through their respective internal approval processes. So, we'll see if anything actually happens or if Besant just wants to announce the precursor to a deal, which is my understanding, is not a deal. Well, here's another big story because, our fondling father, the self-proclaimed president of peace, seems to be ramping up for a war with Venezuela. An intense military buildup targeting the authoritarian regime is underway. So in recent weeks, U.S. forces has carried out at least 8 strikes, killing 38 people against boats in the Caribbean off Venezuela's coast that Washington said were being used for drug trafficking. The latest strike announced on Friday by our Secretary of War, ridiculous, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, reportedly killed 6 people on a boat allegedly being used to smuggle drugs on what was said to be a, quote, known narco trafficking route. 2 further strikes in the Pacific this week killed at least 5 people as tensions also rose between U.S. and Colombia over the administration's tactics against alleged traffickers. But the main focus has been Venezuela, amid a buildup that has seen nuclear-capable B-52 bombers, elite special forces deployed off the South America's country shores. Now they're sending a carrier group down there, or a U.S. aircraft carrier. So I'm sure it's just all saber-rattling, and he won't start a war with Venezuela, right? Just swinging the dick around? Either way, these killings are absolutely illegal. We'll hear more about them in the clip show. And while we're in the Caribbean, at least 3 people have been killed in Haiti as Tropical Storm Melissa is causing devastating flooding in the Caribbean, and meteorologists warn the storm could become a Category 4 hurricane. National Hurricane Center in Miami, which apparently is still a thing, warned of life-threatening and catastrophic flash flooding and landslides throughout the weekend in Jamaica and southern Hispaniola, the island that compromises Haiti and the Dominican Republic. They also announced that if anybody does try to escape the hurricane, they will be killed by our Air Force. I joke, but it's not that jokey, is it? You're out there fishing and all of a sudden you see a missile coming at you? Not good. Not a good place to be, that's for sure. Well, this is bad news that we expected from the Israeli government. They've passed a bill applying Israeli law to the Palestinian West Bank. It's the Palestinians, but it's occupied, of course, by the Israelis. The move is tantamount to annexation of land, which Palestinians want for a state. It won preliminary approval from Israel's parliament last week. And on a related note, top U.S. officials have hit out at the Israeli government's move toward annexing the already occupied West Bank, labeling it an insult that could damage Washington's efforts to keep the Gaza ceasefire on track and build toward a more lasting peace deal. Really? You think that Jared and Steve Witkoff aren't going to just allow them to take the West Bank as well? I bet they are. Well, at the end of the week, last week, of course, the New York Attorney General had to plead guilty to not guilty to a mortgage fraud indictment secured by a Trump loyalist after the president demanded that she and other political opponents be charged. Who's keeping count now? It's her, it's Comey, it's John Bolton, and they're taking aim at several more. And in a related story, a Washington, D.C. resident who drew attention to the deployment of the National Guard in the district by playing the Imperial March from Star Wars is now suing after he was detained in what he argues was a violation of his rights while protesting. How about that? And even though we knew this was coming, doesn't make it any less disappointing. The regime on Thursday announced a plan to allow oil and gas drilling in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, one of the largest remaining tracts of pristine wilderness in the United States. We'll see if it actually happens. Just learned that the National Symphony Orchestra has now begun to open all of its performances with the national anthem. The latest indication of how Gasolini is putting his imprint everywhere, including on the Kennedy Center, and also just this authoritarian urge to make you have to say the Pledge of Allegiance or have the national anthem before like every single event. All right, what else do I have for you? Federal workers lined up around the corner outside the Capital Area Food Bank in D.C. after missing their first full paycheck since the government shutdown began. The food bank, set up specifically for federal workers, provided boxed meals, household goods, and personal hygiene items to over 250 federal employees, which is a real shame. California officials are giving Planned Parenthood $140 million to keep 109 clinics open and offset the financial strain from cuts imposed by Republicans in Washington. Governor there, Gavin Newsom, announced this over the weekend. Newsom said the move affirms the state's continued commitment to abortion access for women in the Golden State amid efforts by Trump and congressional Republicans to shut down Planned Parenthood. Gavin Newsom said California is a reproductive freedom state, and this latest investment continues to show our belief in protecting access to essential care in times of stress. Trump's efforts to defund Planned Parenthood put all of our communities at risk as people seek basic health care from these community providers. Well done, California, the Republic of California, keeping it up, keeping it real. You love to see it. Well, those are the headlines that I've gathered for you today, and now it's time to get to my clip show. Let's start off with this clip of comedian Jason Salmon, who I've seen or heard a couple times. I've shared his work. Very funny. Thanks to listener Carl Wagner for sending this my way. He does a great job of just summing things up lately.
Another weird week. Perfect metaphors do exist edition. While America's bread lines got longer and its health care got more expensive, the president illegally demolished the People's House to make more room so the ultra-wealthy can have better parties. While thieves stole jewels from the Louvre in Paris, America one-upped them by having its institutions looted by a sitting president. He wants us to pay him $250 million because the DOJ investigated his crimes. But he also says it helped him get elected, so maybe he should pay us a commission of all the billions he's made while in office. It reminds me of our most revered U.S. presidents, because he's acting like a combination of all the leaders and ideologies those presidents fought against. And whatever you think about the president's actions, Mike Johnson has definitely not heard about them yet. While the American taxpayer pays hundreds of millions for Noam's private jets and billions for the president's crypto scam, the only work being done by the GOP Congress is covering for the president for posting a video of himself being incontinent all over American citizens. They went on TV saying a man with a weird penchant for gold, poor hygiene practices, and who might have killed one of his own wives is definitely not acting like a king. A GOP lawmaker had a swastika flag, and a cabinet nominee has a Nazi streak, proving once again that young Republicans just get older. While measles cases and the national debt continue to rise as poll numbers are more underwater than a Venezuelan with a fishing hobby, or as they call them, narco-terrorists. And if any survive, they'll definitely be prosecuted. No, return back to their own. That's weird, right? Either way, between acetaminophen and becoming Latin America's most notorious serial killer, I think it's safe to say the president might just not understand how drugs work. George Santos was pardoned because he votes Republican, and Argentina was given a chunk of the U.S. beef market because their leader says nice things to the president. Less food inspections gave us more listeria. Less negotiations gave us more shutdown. And the less qualified you are for the military, the more ICE wants you to play pretend with them. This week they shot American citizens, tackled a blind man, and had to hire more healthcare workers because the number of people dying in their custody. Because they work for small men who want you to fear them. But no matter how big they make that Epstein ballroom, it won't erase their names from his files. And if all you do is hype yourself, complain, and sell people stuff, you're not a king. You're just another episode of The Real Housewives. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, I like it. Jason Salmon? I don't know him. Funny guy. And thanks, Carl, for sending that over. Now let's head over to a couple of clips that we've got from the Sunday shows, starting with the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, making no sense trying to cover up bullshit on Meet the Press.
To another big issue, the Trump administration recently extended a $20 billion lifeline to Argentina that has gotten some bipartisan criticism, Mr. Secretary, including from Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia. I'll read you a little bit of what she wrote. She says, quote, Americans are getting decimated with high cost of living and skyrocketing insurance costs. Many of them have zero savings and some are maxing out credit cards to survive. Tell me how it's America first to bail out a foreign country with 20 or even 40 billion taxpayer dollars. How is this move America first, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Kristen, it is America first because we are supporting a U.S. ally. There will be no taxpayer losses. This is a swap line. This is not a bailout. And it is from the Exchange Stabilization Education Fund, which Treasury, I control at Treasury. It is never registered a loss. It is not going to register a loss this time. We are supporting a U.S. ally in Latin America, and we want to set the tone in Latin America because look at what's going on in Venezuela. It is a failed narco state, and I'm a big fan of Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think she's a fantastic voice in Congress. But please let me finish. So we think it is much better to use American economic power up front to stabilize a friendly government and lead the way. Because we've got many other governments. We've got many other governments in Latin America, Bolivia, Ecuador, Paraguay, who all want to follow. So I would rather extend a swap line than be shooting at the boats carrying drugs as we're having to coming out of Venezuela.
Well, okay, that's enough. That's enough. I don't want to hear whatever nonsense he's going to say about that. But I do want to hear Rand Paul, who has been great and consistent on this. Here he is on Fox News Sunday. He was joined by his colleague in the Senate, Democrat Tim Kaine, who we'll hear from as well. But first, Rand Paul.
Start with you, Senator Paul. What do you need to hear in a briefing? What questions do you have?
You know, it's not so much about a briefing, but we haven't had a briefing. To be clear, we've got no information. I've been invited to no briefing. But a briefing is not enough to overcome the Constitution. The Constitution says that when you go to war, Congress has to vote on it. And during a war, then, there's a lower rules for engagement. People do sometimes get killed without due process. But the drug war or the crime war has typically been something we do through law enforcement. And so far, they have alleged that these people are drug dealers. No one said their name. No one said what evidence. No one said whether they're armed. And we've had no evidence presented. So at this point, I would call them extrajudicial killings. And this is akin to what China does, to Iran does with drug dealers. They summarily execute people without presenting evidence to the public. So it's wrong.
You know what? There are other very important details, and I want to let Rand Paul tell you a little bit more because I think this is a super important issue. I'm giving it a lot of attention.
Well, and Senator Paul, I know you said this isn't about a briefing, but would there be some level of information? Because I've heard other members say they are convinced, they have been told that they can specifically identify these boats, the people on board, and the cargo on board to the level that they're comfortable. So, Senator Paul, do you think that that needs to be a public vetting, or if lawmakers are provided that information, that's enough for you?
Won't be enough, but at the very least, it should be revealed. There's at least two boats. One boat was said to be in distress and trying to get back to land that was bombed. That was said to be a fisherman. I don't know because I don't have any of the evidence. There's also an anomaly in the sense that one of the boats where a bunch were killed, there were two that survived. If they were drug dealers, why wouldn't we prosecute them, present evidence of the drugs, show the arms they were about to invade us with, or show us something? Instead, they're being sent back to Colombia and to Ecuador without a trial, and no one's sort of trying to find out, well, who is the one behind this massive conspiracy to invade America with drugs? They're just sending them back home. So in the one instance, you're killed on sight. On the other instance, if you're captured, we just say, oh, well, we're just going to send you back to your country. Doesn't make any sense.
All right, here is Arizona Senator Ruben Gallego on Meet the Press talking about it.
The administration insists these strikes are consistent with international law. Do you agree with that?
No, it's murder. It's very simple. If this president feels that they're doing something illegally, then he should be using the Coast Guard. If there's an act of war, then you use our military, and then you come and talk to us first. But this is murder. It's sanctioned murder that he is doing that. And it's very simple for someone like him to talk about killing people or doing something in the name of war. He's never actually served. He's never actually pulled a trigger. And it's very dangerous what he's doing, both to our international relations, to our friends down in South America, and to these men and women that have to make these calls for a president who has zero understanding about the responsibility someone has when it comes to having to make life and death decisions. It's disgusting what he's doing.
Yeah, well said by Senator Gallego. And also, let's head over to one of our favorite senators, one of my favorite senators, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. I got 3 clips from his appearance on CNN on Sunday with Jake Tapper. Here's number 1.
The New York Times reported that the private donor who gave President Trump $130 million to pay U.S. troops during the shutdown, that he is billionaire Timothy Mellon. And the donation appears to violate federal law. But what do you say to Americans who look at that and think it's President Trump, not Democrats, making sure that troops get paid?
Well, I think one of the reasons that President Trump is refusing to negotiate is because he likes the fact that the government is closed, because he thinks he can exercise king-like powers. He can open up the parts of the government that he wants. He can pay the employees who are loyal to him. I mean, this is a leader who is trying to transition our government from a democracy to something much closer to a totalitarian state. And so this is part of what happens in totalitarian states. The leader, the regime only decides what things get funded and what don't, often in coordination with their oligarch friends. So I just don't want to live in a world in which Donald Trump and a handful of billionaires decide which part of government works and which don't, which is why I would rather have him at the negotiating table tomorrow so that we can reopen the government and it can be a democratically elected Congress that decides what things get funded, not a handful of super rich dudes.
Super rich Jews? No, he said dudes. But at first I did think he said super rich Jews. But maybe that's my own anti-Semitism. I apologize, but I wanted to make sure nobody else thought that's what he said. All right, here's a little bit more from that appearance.
The leader of the Senate, John Thune, has said that he offered to Democrats a commitment to vote on extending the Obamacare subsidies at a date certain, but Democrats won't take yes for an answer.
Yeah, but that doesn't help anybody in my state because all these Republicans are going to vote against it. I mean, this is like real life, right? This isn't a game. In Connecticut, if you're 60 years old and making somewhere around $60,000, you could be seeing a $25,000 increase in your premiums. Not 25%, $25,000. Mm-hmm. So we don't need a commitment for a vote that fails. We need Republicans to come to the table and say, we're going to fix this problem. We're not asking for much here. We're not asking to fix the entirety of the healthcare system. We're just saying, let's take a piece of the damage that you did with the big, beautiful bill, just a piece of the damage, and let's fix it so that this fall, as prices on beef and school supplies and car repairs are going through the roof, families don't also have to pay these enormous increases in healthcare premiums. I don't think we're asking too much. I don't think we're being unreasonable. I don't think we're being any more unreasonable than Republicans were when they asked to have some of their priorities funded in budgets written when Democrats were in control.
All right, there you go. And one more from Chris Murphy, because Jay Tepper asked Graham Plattner up there in Maine.
Ask you about the Maine Senate race, because earlier this month you called Maine Senate candidate Graham Plattner impressive, but since then, obviously, a lot about him has come out, including the fact that he had a Totenkopf, which is a skull head. It's the Nazi emblem for the SS. He had one of those tattooed on his chest. He's denied that he knew what the tattoo meant until recently, but CNN did find several times he discussed the Totenkopf emblem in recent years and months. Do you still think Plattner is impressive?
Yeah, I saw that reporting. I think I'm meeting with him this upcoming week, so I'm certainly interested to hear from him about it. I mean, anytime you see something like that, you scratch your head. But I've also listened to him talk about, the difficult time that he went through in his life. And frankly, it's not unfamiliar to a lot of soldiers who came back from service and had a very difficult time readjusting. So he sounds like a human being to me, a human being who made mistakes, recognizes them, and is very open about it. But yeah, certainly I'm looking forward to sitting down and talking to him about it. He's obviously, right now performing very well in the polls in Maine. He's talking a language that speaks to a lot of middle-class voters, a lot of Trump voters that frankly are looking for Democrats that understand working class concerns. And I'm looking forward to hearing from him.
There you go. Graham Plattner still in the game. What do you think of that, Bill Boyle? He's exasperated by this, and so are many others, to be fair. And I think it's a really interesting and important time and issue and candidate to talk about. One story I failed to mention in the news headlines is that our awful leader, the notorious PIG, has raised tariffs on Canada 10% after Ontario aired an ad using Ronald Reagan's own words to decry tariffs. That's right. Officials in the province of Ontario said the ad, which protests Trump's tariff policy, will be pulled from the airwaves next week. But too late. Trump already announced he's adding an extra 10% tariff on Canadian imports over the negative TV commercial featuring an actual speech by Ronald Reagan, which he said was AI, but it wasn't. It was actually Ronald Reagan's words. Because of their serious misrepresentation of the facts and hostile act, I'm increasing the tariff on Canada by 10% over and above what they're already paying, he said in a dumb social media post. Well, I've got some not great audio. It's good enough of the Prime Minister of Canada on his way to Asia. Here is Mark Carney responding.
All right. Good morning. Look, for months we have stressed the importance of distinguishing things we can control and things we can't control. We can't control the trade policy of the United States. We recognize that that policy has fundamentally changed from the policy in the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s. And it's a situation where the United States has tariffs against every one of their trading partners to different degrees. And it's in that context that our officials, my colleagues, have been working with their American colleagues on detailed, constructive negotiations, discussions on specific transactions, specific sectors, steel, aluminum, and energy. And a lot of progress has been made. And we stand ready to pick up on that progress and build on that progress when the Americans are ready to have those discussions, because it will be for the benefit of workers in the United States, workers in Canada, and families in both of our countries. Now, what we can control, absolutely, is how we build here at home. And that's the focus of Budget 2025, generational investment here in Canada. And what we can also control, or at least heavily influence, is developing new partnerships and opportunities, including with the economic giants of Asia, which is the focus of this trip.
All right. Well, there's going to be a lot of headlines made during this trip. Kim Jong-un is going to do his best to embarrass the hell out of all of us in Asia. You like that, Kim Jong-un? I also like Chin Jong-un. These are all from Jimmy Kimmel's list of names that he's called him in his monologues over the years, and I love them. All right, let's get to the next clip, which is the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. They profiled him on CBS Sunday Morning.
Newsom says Prop 50 is a direct response to President Trump's redistricting push in Republican-controlled states like Texas.
The new map would give the GOP an advantage in at least 5 more seats.
On one level, Proposition 50 is about congressional maps, but you're framing it as something bigger.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about our democracy. It's about the future of this republic. I think it's about, what the founding fathers lived and died for, this notion of the rule of law, not the rule of Don, this notion of popular sovereignty, fundamentally, co-equal branches of government, system of checks and balances. His presidency de facto ends next November. If we're successful, we, the people, are successful in taking back the House and making sure that we're successful.
You really believe, Governor, if the Democrats take back power in the House, his presidency's over?
De facto, as we know it today, fire and fury signifying maybe something. But finally, you have rebalanced this system. Co-equal branch of government begins to assert itself. It appears again. If you have a Speaker Johnson, we may have a third term of President Trump. I really believe that.
There you go. I really believe it, too. Senator Bernie Sanders did a one-on-one over at Axios. I might have played this last week, but it's good, so I'm sharing it again if not.
He's broken. You may be crazy, may be a pathological liar, may be just a president who is doing such horrific authoritarian things. But he's not stupid. He's not stupid. What Trump has always understood, unlike many Democrats, is the system is broken. You're a working class person today. And you know what? In the richest country in the history of the world, you can't afford housing. You can't afford health care. You can't afford child care. You can't afford to send your kid to college. And if you go to the grocery store and you want decent quality food for your children, you can't afford that as well. Meanwhile, the richest people are becoming richer. So Trump understood that there are millions of people who are hurting who are disgusted with the system. And in many ways, he said, I will fix it.
Yeah, good stuff from Bernie Sanders. I also like this from the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, who I'm not convinced isn't a robot. Here it is from Real Time with Bill Maher. You'll hear his whiny voice and then a good answer.
What is your prediction for the midterms? I think the Democrats actually are going to do very well because, I mean, if you look at what's going on now, even among Republicans, the polling is not especially good on the economy. And this is among Republicans who are very worried about the economy and also think he's overreached. Like, I think 63% of the people said, we need to check on this guy. He is a little drunk with power. A little, I say. Wink, wink. And that has been noticed, I think, even by sort of the person who doesn't pay that much attention to politics. So that's usually when people do really well from the other party in the midterms, when they say, okay, there's this guy in the White House, because this has happened before with both parties, not to this degree, of course. And drunk with power, we need to check. You think that's what's going to happen?
I do. I think people don't like extremism. I think people feel that the country may have swung too far one way and now is swinging too far the other, and it's impacting their daily lives, even mental health, getting hit by how the news comes out over and over and over right now. But before we get to the midterms, the Democrats are going to win the governorship of both New Jersey and Virginia. We're working really hard to make that happen.
All right, I like that, and I always love Mark Elias of Democracy Docket. He was on MSNBC over the weekend, had this to warn and say.
Number one, the old rule book is gone. And Democrats have to get over lamenting it. We have to get over nostalgia. Okay, we're more than 9 months into this administration. These are the new rules. So the days of the use of the Department of Justice to prosecute political enemies, that is the world that exists today. Every time I hear a former federal prosecutor tell me that Department of Justice says these rules are old, those rules, I just think we're like taking a step back, like we're not moving forward. And the same is true with redistricting. You know, I was on your air months ago now saying that Democrats needed to gerrymander, and I use that word directly, needed to gerrymander 30 seats in 7 states. 30. When Texas did 5, I said we do 30. That was California, 9. That was Virginia. It was New Jersey. It was New York. It was Colorado. It was Washington. It was Oregon. Okay, and that we should do all of that because the only rule that Donald Trump understands is that if he does something and there is an overwhelming response, he may back away. And instead, he did 5, we're matching 5. Now they're threatening these states, we're doing this. And I think we're now in this back and forth. But at least Democrats seem to have learned the lesson that we need to be in that game of being back and forth, because otherwise democracy is going to die on some nonpartisan redistricting commission's, plate.
Well, upsetting, but important, and Mark Elias is great at explaining things, so I appreciate him always sounding the alarms, because that was upsetting and scary. Let's end the clip show with some comedy. This from Seth Meyers on Late Night and NBC on Friday night.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt pushed back this week against criticism of the East Wing demolition and said the Democrats are just, quote, jealous. What? The only person jealous of that gaping hole is the Kool-Aid man. During a meeting yesterday, President Trump said that he has plans to build a glass bridge between the White House and his new ballroom. Well, you got to hand it to him. I mean, even at his age, he's still looking for new and innovative ways to look up ladies' dresses. I think I'll take my meeting under the glass bridge. During a meeting yesterday with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, President Trump said that the military has curbed drug trafficking via international waters and said, quote, they call it ocean drugs. Nope, they don't. That's not a phrase. Why does everything you say make you sound like a bad guesser on pyramid? Jellyfish, octopus, shark, ocean drugs. Only Trump hears about drugs in the ocean and says, you know what we should call them? It's like being really proud you came up with onion rings. Authorities in France this week charged a woman with stealing 6 gold nuggets from the Museum of Natural History in Paris. All right, what is going on at French museums, dude? Do they not know about locking up at night? It's easier to steal from a French museum than it is to get razor blades at CVS. We all agree. A group of investors that includes Kansas City Chiefs star Travis Kelce announced this week that it has purchased shares of Six Flags and wants to push the company to improve its amusement parks. Said Kelce, hear me out, 7 flags. After participating in last night's mayoral debate, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo attended the Knicks game while Curtis Sliwa watched some cats fight a pigeon in Central Park. He's not going to win, but I kind of wish he would win. For the old monologue, it wouldn't be bad to have Mayor Sliwa in there. The FBI today arrested Miami Heat player Terry Rozier and Portland Trailblazers coach Chauncey Billups as part of a sports betting investigation. Ah, man, I just needed one more arrest to hit my parlay. A Kentucky man is attempting to set a Guinness World Record with a Halloween lawn display that has more than 300 props, but it's still not the scariest lawn in the neighborhood.
Picture of a Trump 2028 lawn sign.
Yeah, see? And finally, General Motors said yesterday it plans on rolling out a new feature that lets drivers go hands-free and take their eyes off the road. It's called texting. And that was a model.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty good, pretty funny. All right, now it's time to get to my guest. She's a professor at Boston College Law School where she teaches and writes in philanthropy policy, taxes, property, and estate planning. She is co-founder and director of the Boston College Law School Forum on Philanthropy and the Public Good, a nonpartisan think tank that convenes scholars and practitioners to explore questions regarding whether the rules governing the charitable sector best serve the public good. She's also author of Immorality and the Law, the Rising Power of the American Dead, which looks at how American law treats the interests of the dead and what it tells us about our values for the living. Her new book is The Second Estate, How the Tax Code Made an American Aristocracy. In it, she offers an unprecedented look behind the scenes of America's Byzantine system of taxation, laying bare not only its capacity to consolidate wealth, but also the mechanisms by which it has created two fundamentally separate American societies: the working Americans who pay and the ultra-rich who benefit. This is her first time on the show. Really excited to welcome her. You can watch this interview on YouTube, youtube.com/StandUpWithPete. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Ray Madoff for the first time on Stand Up. All right. Very excited to have the author, professor, a real expert, which I love to have, joining me right now to talk about her new book, just out, The Second Estate, How the Tax Code Made an American Aristocracy, from Boston College Studios. Professor Ray Madoff, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Pete. This is so fun.
And
it's unrelated.
Launch day today. In case anybody's asking, unrelated is the question. And it's pronounced Madoff. Did I say it right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That is hilarious that you have to live your life just letting people know that. But now that they know, we don't need
a plot twist. It used to just be not a man. Now I had to add not related.
Right. Fair enough. Well, congratulations on your new book. Taxes are the most important issue for so many reasons. I've used it my entire life, my career, to say the most important issues are often boring, which is why we have to talk about them in important and interesting ways to fight that apathy. How do you make the case to your students and to your readers that this issue, which you are an expert on, is so important?
It's actually the single most important thing that affects Americans, if you think about it, right? So first of all, the amount of money the country takes in has a significant impact on the things the country can do. But even more importantly, how we allocate the burden has a significant effect on the people who have to pay the taxes. And basically, when somebody who earns $60,000 has to hand over close to $14,000 in taxes, that can be the difference between a car or their rent or any number of things. So how we allocate tax burdens has a significant impact on people's lives and the country as a whole.
I've been talking about this issue for years, especially with our good friend David K. Johnston, whose work I'm sure you're familiar with and respect.
Yeah.
But I've learned a little bit about how to talk about it and how to talk with people about it. But one of my first questions I like to ask people in this dispute or argument, if it comes up, is do you pay money, do you pay taxes mostly on your earnings, your income, your salary, your wages, or do you pay more likely taxes on your investments? And
Yes.
which one of those do you think you pay more taxes on? The vast majority of people say number one, right? Their earnings and the work their actual labor that they do. And when you tell them that so many people don't pay money, or people who pay taxes on their investments pay far less of a percentage, they get mad at just that. How do you talk about that issue? Make me smarter at talking about that issue.
So basically, wage earners are really carrying the whole kit and caboodle for the most part, right? They pay all the payroll taxes, which cover 30% of the country's expense, and they pay most of the income taxes. And the reason for that is because wealthy Americans, some think about it, it's because of the difference in rates, right? Like capital gains rates are lower than ordinary income rates, but you don't have to get that fancy because the problem is more significant than that. The problem is that people who have wealth can avoid income taxes altogether by avoiding income. And that's what they do. And they're able to avoid income in part by their own actions, like they don't take salaries. You know, all of our billionaires, Bezos and Zuckerberg and all of those people, get little or nothing in salary. Sometimes they're $1 a year guy. Bezos sort of topped things off at $80,000, but he was still able to claim the child tax credit with his $80,000 salary, which he did.
I think you talk about Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett makes $100,000 for everything, bonus included. And you might think, that's just because he's a modest guy. No, it's because he saves taxes when he does it. So taxes are taxed. Salaries, earnings are taxed with the greatest burden, rates up to 37%, and additional payroll taxes that are up to 15.3%. So that's a lot of taxes. On the other hand, what our super rich do is they eschew salaries, not for them. And what they rely on instead is the growing value of their assets, of their stock, which of course grows in leaps and bounds, tens and hundreds of billions of dollars. And those gains are never subject to tax unless the property is sold. And if they don't sell it, they don't pay taxes. And what our system allows them to do is to simply borrow against those funds and thereby not pay any taxes at all.
Instead of talking, about the super wealthy, or maybe how do you divide the different groups of Americans? We're talking about America here, and we can talk about how other countries do it in a much more fair and understandable way. But our tax code is all rigged up, and for all kinds of reasons, you go into the history of it and explain who and name names and why and how we got here. How do you like to teach and write about the different percentages and the different earners and who's got a fair tax burden and who doesn't?
Okay, so it is actually the case that it is our high income earners who are carrying the lion's share of the taxes. And one of the big mistakes is that when we talk about tax burdens, there's sometimes you maybe hear like the Democrats were saying well, you have to increase taxes, but people over 400,000 need to pay a lot more taxes.
Sure.
People over 400,000 are already paying a lot of taxes. Indeed, they're paying the most taxes. But the problem is the wealth owners, the people who don't need income. And the real way to think about it is, from my perspective, not in terms of high income and low income taxpayers. They're all paying lots of taxes. It's about people who need to make an income and people who don't. Our wealth owners, people who have inherited wealth, are able to be entirely income tax free and therefore are able to avoid taxes.
More than anything else, you're looking at inherited wealth.
Yes, inherited wealth is a big part of the story. So
why are you attacking the luckiest amongst us?
I know. Because we have a very unfair system when it comes to inheritances. So basically, just to step back one further point, right? Yeah. The reason those with great wealth don't pay taxes is because we do not effectively tax investments and inheritances, and those are their two sources of income. So if you're walking down the street and you find $1,000 on the street, you owe taxes on $1,000, you're supposed to report it to the IRS. You find $10,000, you're supposed to report it to the IRS. That is found money subject to income taxes. However, if I decide to give you $10,000, you don't have to tell anyone. And if I decide to give you $10 million, you don't have to tell anyone. It is entirely written out of our income tax system. So inheritances are not subject to income taxes at all. Neither are payments from life insurance policy, which is the other thing that very wealthy people do. They use life insurance as a vehicle for tax-free transfers of wealth. Yeah. So people who receive gifts, inheritances, and life insurance not only pay no taxes, but it's their own private business. They don't show up in any of our statistics. So the one thing that we do have, however, is the estate and gift tax. And people were led to believe that the estate and gift tax was this tremendously burdensome and immoral double tax that hurt family farms and businesses, right? And that was just a big scam.
I thought that
was a big scam.
The estate tax, I thought I learned years ago that no one paid the estate tax unless they had like $10 million that they were inheriting or something. And you write about it. I think the
but you know
number,
what? Even $10 million today is not subject to estate tax. So now it's been increased to $15 million or $30 million per couple. And what's worse is that's not even the worst of it, because the bigger issue is for our billionaires, multi-billionaires, 100 millionaires, people with loads of money, and how they're able to avoid the estate tax. And that's something that has been an untold story that I talk about in my book.
So it's really important that people care about and think about these issues. But what they don't do, what we don't do, and it's natural, is since we don't understand how the system specifically is rigged, we think a lot about our own taxes and our own income. And the statistics on that are the most convincing, easy to make people believe whatever they want, however people want to twist those numbers, however they want to talk about the taxes. I still go back to paying taxes on the actual work that you do versus all of these other different apparatuses that you're talking about. But you're really more focused on the super wealthy and the fact that they are inheriting so much of their wealth. Why are you so focused?
And the investment income. So
yes, you said it clearly.
And their investment income. Well, here's the thing. And if there's a statistic that I call the statistic that saves the rich from taxes. Okay. And this statistic is, which might be the one you're referring to. Every year they publish who pays the taxes, right? And you'll see this, the Wall Street Journal is regularly, every year they publish a story about soaking the rich. We're already soaking the rich. And you might have seen these stories they publish every year. And this is the statistic from 2024. The top 1% pay 40% of income taxes, and 40% of Americans pay no income taxes at all. And if you just heard that statistic, the top 1% pay 40% of income taxes and 40% of Americans pay no income taxes at all, you would think, well, what the hell am I doing complaining, right? We already have this system where the rich are paying all the taxes. But that statistic is highly misleading for a number of reasons.
Right.
First of all, because the top 1% is not the top 1% of wealth owners. It is those with the most taxable income. And as we talked about, the richest Americans, because their income comes in the form of investment gains and inheritances, they are just as likely to be in the 40% of Americans that pay no taxes as they are in the top 1% that pay most of the taxes.
So the next time you hear that 40% of Americans that pay no taxes, it make sure you consider the fact that lots and lots of them are super wealthy people that are making their money on investments and inheritance.
Exactly. And ProPublica did an expose based on leaked tax returns about 6 years ago. They had actual tax returns by a guy by the name of Charles Littlejohn, like the Robin Hood character. He was an IRS employee, and he just couldn't stand what he was seeing, and he leaked the tax returns of the richest Americans. And ProPublica did an expose that showed how many of our richest Americans paid zero income taxes. They were indeed in the 40% of non-payers. The other reason that statistic is highly misleading is that for people, it undercounts the tax burden of our lower earning Americans. And that's because our payroll taxes are significantly more burdensome than people recognize. Our payroll taxes are largely hidden from the public in ways that people don't even think of them as being taxes. They look like they are contributions. They're under names like FICA and FUTA, and people don't even know what the heck they are, but they are in fact taxes that are collected from working Americans to pay a current obligation of the country, which is the Social Security and Medicare of current retirees. So that's the other way that statistic is highly misleading.
Oh, gosh, this is such an important book and such an important issue. And it's really interesting. Just take a pause and talk to me about how you see the politics playing out, because I feel like when someone understands the tax system the way that you do, and you're talking to them, they must be shocked. And let's say that person is a, quote, free market, fiscal conservative, right-wing, Republican, capitalist, you name it. I would imagine they don't really have a lot of disagreement with how you see this morally to a certain extent, because they don't even realize it's happening. I'm not talking about the people who are taking advantage of those loopholes, if you will, which they may or may not know that they're taking advantage of them, especially if they inherited it. But I'm talking about just people who have a certain set of moral beliefs around taxes. The people who often talk and most about taxes identify politically as conservative Republicans, I think. And they get pissed about where that money is going and who's going to. And the main gripe is, I work really hard, I pay my taxes. Meanwhile, it's all my taxpayer money is going to poor people who don't work really hard. How is that fair? But when they talk to you, I'm guessing that you make a lot of things clear to them, and then they realize that the vast majority of us are on the same side, or should be.
I like to think that's what happens. So I think that it often does. And I think that the other misconception that people have, which is one you mentioned, which is they say, well, you just want more money for the government, right? That this is about how much money the government collects. But I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, no matter how much the government should be collecting, what I'm interested in is the allocation of the burden amongst different taxpayers. Why is it that somebody who earns $60,000 hands over almost 20% of that in taxes, but somebody who is handed $10 million pays zero in taxes? This just doesn't seem fair to me. And if we want to have a fairer system, it can be used to reduce the tax burden of working Americans by getting more money from the wealthiest Americans. It costs us a lot. And I think that the other really interesting statistic, if I can share it with you.
Yeah.
One of my favorite statistics from the whole thing. So you've pointed out a lot of reasons why people find taxes boring. I find it hard to believe, but I'll take you at your word, right? It's intimidating. It seems it's a lot of numbers. Is it math? It sounds really like a snore. But the other issue is that it often involves large numbers.
Yeah.
And when we have large numbers, they're so hard to understand, right? It's sort of like, how far are the stars and how long ago were the dinosaurs and how much money does the rich people have and how much money is the government take in and what's our deficit? All those issues, the numbers are so big, it's difficult for people to keep track of. But I'm going to give you a simplified version of our 2024 numbers, and you will understand the nature of the problem, okay? You might already know these numbers, so I could even put you to the test because you seem like a very knowledgeable guy. But since most people I know don't know the numbers, even very sophisticated people, I think I won't put you to the test quite yet, just with our final question.
Well,
okay?
I mean, I have been prepping to interview you by reading your book, so I think I might know some of these numbers, but I'm still don't need to be. We are live. I can't edit this out, so I have very little credibility already. So
I'm not going to risk it there. All right, so here it is. You ready? Okay, so in 2024, the government took in about $5 trillion in revenue.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was from all sources. It was 4.9, but I'm going to call it 5 because that's simpler numbers. All right. $5 trillion. And that was from income taxes, payroll taxes, corporate taxes, tariffs, and estate and gift taxes. It all came in $5 trillion. All right. And we spent about $6.8 trillion. Okay. So we had a shortfall of just under $2 trillion. All right.
Yep.
So we took in $5 trillion.
Yep.
We spent close to $7 trillion. We had to add another $2 trillion to our national debt. Okay.
You've got a budget. You got a national budget deficit. We spend about $1 trillion more than we bring in, and when we do that,
about
goes
$2 trillion more. Yeah,
and that goes on the credit card and becomes what's called the national debt. And
exactly,
those are two different things, and we need to understand. And we've learned a lot about them. But go ahead; those are the numbers.
Okay, so now here's the question: people often say it doesn't matter if we tax the rich, because they can't possibly do anything to make a dent in these numbers. Right? You ever hear people say that? Okay.
I mean, it's still morally wrong.
Regardless of whether it's morally wrong, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, forget it. They just don't have enough money. You got to tax the middle class. I hear that all the time. We got to go after the middle class. The rich don't have enough. Okay. So you tell me if you think the rich have enough. In 2024, the amount of wealth owned by the richest 1% of Americans. I don't know if you read that in the book or not. Do you want to take a guess? If we have that $5 trillion,
40 or 50%?
What's that?
Is it a percentage?
No, it's a flat number. I'm asking. So we took in $5 trillion from all sources, the government, and we spent about $6.8 trillion. How much did the richest 1% own at this time?
$500 billion.
$50 trillion. $50 trillion.
I don't understand how those numbers work. That's the wealth that they've accrued over. Okay, I think. Yes.
$50 trillion. And the problem is, you might say, well, how much of it was income? And the answer is, we don't know, because none of it's reported, because we don't require them to report their investments and their inheritances.
We have no idea. So how do we know this number?
No. We know what they own because you can look it up by typing FRED. That's the Federal Reserve. Yep. FRED, wealth owned by the top 1%. It shows it growing up. And now it's 50 trillion. Over the course of my book, from just the third quarter to the fourth quarter, it went from 47 trillion to 50 trillion. Their wealth is just growing in leaps and bounds. And I say it matters if these people pay taxes.
How much, I thought you were asking per year. How much would it make a difference in the budget, in the numbers, if they actually paid that in a year?
Because if they paid what, though? They're not going to hand over all their wealth, right? But the question is that their acquisitions of wealth are
if they paid anything
to occur tax-free.
You could I didn't mention a number or a policy. If you had any kind of taxes, because they're saying there's none, what kind of policy proposal would there be that you could, and how much money could you reasonably bring in? This is what Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, plenty of other progressives, and the rest of the world has a progressive tax system. It's shocking probably to talk about how much differently morally theirs is than ours. But what are some of the proposals in terms of the actual kind of important numbers? You hear about this mayor.
I actually disagree with Senators Warren and Sanders on the issue of wealth taxes. So that's their proposal has been wealth taxes, and even Biden had a proposal of, they're called mark-to-market taxes, meaning tax the increase in value and the decrease in all of that. I teach estate and gift tax and estate planning. I'm lead author of a treatise on estate planning. And the problem is in valuation. And Rich, if you have an annual tax on the value of people's assets, my concern is that the richest Americans are going to run away from the easily valued publicly traded stock market and put all of their assets into the much harder to value private interests. I'm very concerned that even if we got past the constitutional issues of a wealth tax, that type of annual tax would just provide too much of an incentive for people to hide their wealth. But there are other ways of doing it that I think would work much better. One of them is a rule that was proposed by this unlikely duo, Richard Nixon and Barack Obama. And that is to tax the gains of, so right now, when somebody has property and it goes from 0 to 100 million, we never, or 0 to 10 million, right? We don't tax that gain until the property is sold. And if the property isn't sold, then we don't tax it at all.
Capital gains tax.
We don't impose a capital gains tax.
Right, but that's what Obama proposed.
No, what Obama proposed and Nixon proposed was that in addition to imposing a tax when property is sold, we should actually impose a tax whenever that property is transferred, either by gift or at death. Whenever the property is transferred, we should tally that gain on the person who earned that gain. So that would be one way of taxing, and that's what they do in Canada today. So that would be one way of capturing gains without having the complexity of an annual wealth tax.
But how much of a capital gain, or what percentage of capital gains are property? I mean, I think you're talking about real estate, or you're not talking about general investments.
Well, for our richest Americans, they primarily own things like their stock in Meta, Google, Amazon.
Oh, so that's what you're referring to as property. Forgive me. So the entire estate. So their investment would be, because my understanding was that back in the day, President Obama proposed and never passed a capital gains tax specifically on hedge fund managers who currently pay 15%.
No, that was the opposite. So right now, that's the carried interest problem.
Carried interest. That's right.
Yeah. So every single presidential candidate has claimed that they were going to address. That's a special income tax issue involving hedge fund managers who are having their income taxed at the lower rates that we have on investments, even though it's really compensation for their services. So instead of them being taxed at 37%, they're being subject to tax at a 20% rate. So that's the carried interest loophole, which is something else that should be addressed.
Okay.
But it's not because could politics have something to do with it? I think so.
Absolutely. But I will
Did you hear the comment that was reportedly Steve Schwartzman reportedly said about Obama's plan to tax carried interest? It was reported that he said that it was like Hitler's March on Poland.
I remember
for Obama
that.
to propose taxing carried interest.
But that kind of rhetoric is common around taxes, especially on the right. We're referring to it as a burden. I'm not even necessarily sure that it should be thought of it, because it only creates more animus towards government, towards the price of civilization, which is paying taxes, is my understanding. But they talk about it in terms sometimes of slavery or confiscation. They're confiscating my money. So the rhetoric around it has always been what animates a lot of people's, I think, their opinions if you believe and you buy into that kind of rhetoric. It sounds like it's the worst thing that could ever happen is that you would have to pay taxes on, in this case, what you're talking about, inherited wealth. So how many people is that, though? It's an interesting idea, but it doesn't seem like it would affect that many people, that many folks that are necessarily inheriting their wealth or paying taxes.
So if you look at the Forbes 400, a full third of the people on that list are there. They've got many dozens of billions of dollars, and it's all inherited wealth. So, a lot of people have a lot of inherited wealth. So for inherited wealth, I think the problem that we have with inherited wealth is that we rely on this estate tax. And the estate tax has been completely destroyed in the public's eye by a campaign that was financed by 18 of the country's richest families. And as a result, it has created a problem that people haven't realized, which is that Congress has stopped doing anything to keep the estate tax in any sort of working order.
Shocking.
So what's interesting is that over the course of my teaching career, when I began teaching, there had been a recent enactment of the generation skipping transfer tax. And then Congress did these special valuation rules. They added 3 new sections to avoid manipulations of taxes. Okay. That was in 1990. Those were enacted 1986 and 1990. 1990 marked the beginning of this campaign, of this death tax campaign, right? The rich families hired people and President Bush, remember, was like, I'm going to kill the death tax.
Yeah.
There was this big campaign against the death tax. And since 1990, there has not been a single loophole closing provision adopted by Congress.
That's crazy.
So for 35 years, basically estate planners, me, my students, everybody, right, hard at work, coming up with workarounds from the tax. And Congress does nothing to close even a single loophole. And so the estate tax, when people talk about the estate, so remember we talked about the richest 1%. They're the ones that were supposed to be subject to the estate tax. Did we talk about this point about how much it raised?
About how much that the estate tax actually raised in 1 year?
Yeah. So in 2024, so we know those people had, let's just set the ground rules, okay? Yeah. So the estate tax, it applies to transfers greater than $15 million. But the richest 1% have more than $15 million, okay?
Yeah.
And it imposes a 40% tax on transfers both during life and at death, whenever somebody transfers in excess of that amount. All right. So they had $50 trillion, 40% tax. Guess how much it raised in 2024?
In 1 year. Was it $30 billion?
It was $30 billion.
I read that, I think, in the book. Yeah.
30 billion out of 50 trillion. 30 billion is also how much Elon Musk both earned and lost in a single day.
So just to be clear, you're saying that's a very small number because it's not even on the wealth that they have. $50 trillion for them to pay in aggregate 30 billion in 1 year is nothing. And furthermore, to make it even more tangible, just to think about, we just gave Argentina $30 billion or $40 billion as a bailout. No big deal. Like the U.S. government hands that money out all the time. And so
what's important, what people don't realize is that, so people like hate the estate tax. They think it's unfair, which it's fine. I'm not going to fight with people. I understand why the estate tax feels unfair, right?
Well,
and
if you believe that you're paying twice on the money, that you're paying
like you're paying twice. Although, of course, our richest Americans are never paying taxes on those growth and value of their property. So they're not paying twice. Their only tax that they would be paying would be on the transfer of property at death or by gift. But sorry.
I would still argue that if I inherited wealth, I should have to pay taxes on it because money.
I totally agree with you. That's why I think that what we need to do is repeal the estate tax and replace it with bring inheritances back into the income tax system. So if we go back to your found money situation, right? You find 1,000, 10,000 on the street, you're supposed to pay taxes on it. We should have a similar system on gifts and inheritances, but we have a culture, like people might want to be able to provide for their kids and their family and things like that. We could even have each person be able to inherit $1 or $2 million tax free, and after that pay income taxes on it. And that would be a much fairer system than the system we have now, where people are thinking it's a burdensome double tax when actually it's a non-tax.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't have to convince me of that. All right. Well, if you were to, and I'm sure you do talk to policymakers at every level of government, what do you think? I think that there's two different answers here. I think the question is, what is the most fiscally responsible or morally sound tax policy? And I think that is a one way. A budget is a moral document. I've heard that said. I agree with that. But then there's the politically pragmatic one. And then there's the we are living in end times one with, so like the politically pragmatic one, what would work with a Mitt Romney or George W. Bush president? What kind of bipartisanship could you get passed with a Senate filibuster? Like these tax policies, there's the ideal, and then there's not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good in terms of what you could pragmatically get. But give me the morally sound and ideal one that would actually be effective and that would make it hard for people to scam and get around, I guess.
I think that we could fix the system, and I think that we will fix the system.
Oh.
That's because I think it's become, I'm an optimist by nature. So
I am too, but I also pay very close attention and have been covering politics for over a decade, and I've watched.
Well, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to do anything in the next 2 years.
Generations.
I'm not saying it's going to happen soon, but the thing is, we have seen pendulum swing, right? We have seen in recent years unbelievable swinging of the pendulum.
But I'm only going to argue against it because of the argument that you made earlier is, yes, we've seen the pendulum swing on many issues, but as you stated earlier, not on taxes since like 1986.
Because the public has been confused, right? They've been duped. The public has been duped about who carries the burdens of taxes.
For sure.
And so I think that the word will get out. People will understand. My dream is that the phrase, the second estate, will become a meme. Do you know what the second estate refers to? I don't blame you. I didn't know myself when my editor suggested it.
Well, you write about it in the book, but you do it.
So the second estate were the royalty of pre-revolutionary France, the aristocracy. And under the law, the aristocracy was specifically written out of the tax system. They didn't have to pay taxes. They had special privileges, and their special privilege was not paying taxes. And what I say here is that's what we've done here to our richest Americans. We've created our very own second estate. And when the public realizes that, it's not the type of thing we've had all of these no kings marches this past week, right? All across the country, people are rallying against these privileges of aristocracy. And that's what principles the country was founded on. And so I think that with knowledge, we will have shifting perspectives about what should be done.
Well, that's why it is an amazing title, and that's why we need to do everything we can to get it trending, to make it go viral. The second estate was the nobility in pre-revolutionary France, a privileged class that held significant political, social, and economic power. And they refer to them, as aristocrats and lords and royalty who held high-ranking positions in the government, military, and judiciary. I mean, I think that's what we talk about when we're talking about an oligarchy in a way. We don't use the same terminology, but they often have the same privileges and a lack of checks and balances on them.
Yeah, it's the richest. I think if we just think about those who have, anyone who has enough wealth that they don't need an income, that's the group that is not paying taxes and doesn't have to. They might choose to pay taxes, but they don't have to pay taxes.
I love talking to you about this book. It's such an important idea and issue and book to get and buy and give as a gift, and really just to learn about this for yourselves. It's such, like I started by saying, an important issue, tax policy, and to understand how it has been written and rigged and what can be done about it is why I've always loved talking to people like David K. Johnston and other economists and accountants and so on who understand this stuff. So I'm really excited to be introduced to your work, and we got to keep talking, Professor, because I've learned.
Thank you so much, Pete.
Yeah, I've learned so much.
It's great talking with you.
Yeah, I'm going to proselytize. I'm going to go proselytize about it as much as possible.
Excellent. That's the way to be.
Yeah, there you go. There you have it. I hope you liked it. I hope she liked it. I think she did. Get the book, The Second Estate, How the Tax Code Made an American Aristocracy. Join me today at 11 live with Ophira Eisenberg, and again later on at 4 live with David Rothkopf. At least those are on the schedule. They can cancel anytime they want. That's fine, but hopefully I'll be live with both of them on Substack and YouTube. YouTube.com/StandUpWithPete. Substack.com/StandUpWithPete. Check me out at both of those, and check me out November 6th when I'm rooting on and cheering for the great John Carroll at his album release party in Purcellville, Virginia. I'll also be in attendance at Ophira Eisenberg's comedy special taping November 9th in New York City, if you want to go to that. That's it. That's all I've got, and I really appreciate you being here, you bumblebees. Thanks for staying all the way to the end, and I will talk to you later.
Boy, you better stand up. Well, there's a whole lot sugar to let in some light. You gotta stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.